Let me ask you something. When you were 32 years old, how did you define success? Take a second. Actually think about it. Go ahead, I'll wait. Okay. You probably didn't actually stop and think about it. You kept driving or walking or folding laundry because honestly, who pauses a podcast to reflect? But I'm going to bet that your 32-year-old definition of success sounded something like this: get promoted, make more money, get promoted again, make more money again, build a reputation, build a title, maybe build a team, definitely build a retirement account because, wow, you really thought you'd have that figured out by now. But here's the thing: that definition worked. For a while, it worked really well, actually, because the ladder was right there. You were climbing it, and someone at the top was dropping down a new rung and calling it a career path. But then something happened. Maybe the ladder ran out of rungs. Maybe someone moved the ladder. Maybe you looked around and realized you've been climbing the wrong ladder entirely. Maybe you got laid off or pushed out or restructured, which is corporate for we'd rather not say what actually happened. Or maybe nothing dramatic occurred at all. Maybe you just woke up one Tuesday morning, drove to a job you're generally good at, and thought quietly in the back of your mind, were you where you keep the thoughts you don't say out loud? You said, is this it? That question, is this it? That quiet Tuesday question, that's where this episode starts. I'm Rich Jones, and this is Live Without an Expiration Date, the podcast for people in the second half of their careers who are done pretending they have it all figured out and are now ready, actually, to figure it out. Today, we're talking about redefining success, not upgrading it, not selling it, not settling for less, redefining it from scratch on your own terms without apologizing. Let's go. Before we blow up that old definition of success, I want to defend it for a minute. Because here's what I think gets lost in the redefined success conversation. The original definition wasn't stupid. It wasn't shallow. It wasn't something you were tricked into. It was actually pretty rational. When you're in the first half of your career, you're operating in a world of real constraints. You have bills, you have people depending on you, you have a mortgage or you're trying to get one, you have kids you who are aggressively expensive in ways that no one told you about before. You have a career that's not yet established, which means you need external validation to know if you're on the right track, since you don't have enough experience to trust your own read of the situation. In that world, title matters, pay matters, promotion cycles matter, performance reviews, even though we all know they're partially fiction, matter because those are the signals the system sends you to tell you whether you're winning or losing. And when you're new to the game, you watch the scoreboard. I did. I'll be honest with you, I watched the scoreboard obsessively. I wanted the title. I wanted the trajectory. I wanted to be the person in the room who clearly had a future. And I worked hard for it. And I got a lot of it. And I'm not ashamed of any of that. But here's what I didn't notice while I was watching the scoreboard: the scoreboard was someone else's. The metrics I was optimizing for, the title ladder, the compensation bands, the org chart positions, those weren't metrics I chose. They were handed to me by the system I was operating in. They were the metrics the institution cared about. And because the institution was rewarding me for hitting them, I convinced myself that I cared about them. And again, I want to be fair. There's a real overlap between what the institution rewards and what you generally want. I wanted financial security. I wanted to be respected. I wanted to do meaningful work. And the scoreboard measured things that were at least adjacent to those desires. So it felt coherent. The problem isn't that you were wrong to chase those things in your 30s and 40s. The problem is that most of us never stop to ask whether the original definition of success still fits once the context changes. Because in the second half of your career, the context changes dramatically. Your kids, if you have them, are probably grown or mostly grown. Your mortgage is maybe paid down. Your financial picture, even if it's not perfect, is clearer. You have a track record. You have a reputation. You know what you're good at. You know what you hate. You've had enough jobs and enough bosses and enough performance reviews and enough reorgs to have data, real data about what works for you and what doesn't. And yet, a staggering number of people in the second half of their careers are still running on the original software, still optimizing for the old scoreboard, still measuring themselves against metrics they never consciously chose. That's not loyalty to your values, that's inertia. And inertia in the second half of your career is expensive. Here's what the career advice industrial complex tells you. The second half of your career is fundamentally different, not harder, not easier, different. The rules change, the incentives change, the time horizon changes. And if you don't update your operating assumptions, you end up playing a different game by the wrong rule book. Let me give you a few examples. The first example, the math changes. In your 30s, a sacrifice now for a payoff later makes a lot of sense. You take a lower paying job with a better upside. You grind through a terrible boss because the experience is valuable. You move your family across the country for an opportunity because you're building something long term. In your 50s and 60s, that math looks different. Later is closer. The compounding window is shorter, which means the cost benefit of certain sacrifices shifts. A miserable job that pays well might have been worth it at 38. At 57, that's a different calculation. This isn't defeatism. This is math. You are allowed to do the math. Second, the relationship between title and meaning changes. I've talked to a lot of people in the second half of their careers, people who are objectively successful by any traditional measure, who will tell you quietly, usually after the second glass of beer at a conference, that their title stopped meaning anything to them years ago. They carry it because it's useful. It gets them in rooms, it gives them leverage, but it doesn't give them satisfaction. The thing that gives them satisfaction is the work itself, the problem solving, the relationships, the actual impact of what they do, not the label attached to who they are. That's a shift worth paying attention to. Third, the relationship between money and enough changes. Now, I want to be careful here because I know that financial security is real and economic anxiety is real. And not everyone listening to this is in a position where money is solved. I understand that. But I also know that many people in the second half of their careers have reached or are approaching a threshold where the next 20% pay increase would not meaningfully change their life, where the marginal dollar of additional income delivers significantly less value than, say, a marginal hour of autonomy. And yet, they're still negotiating as if maximum compensation is the goal, because that's what the original playbook says. The question worth asking, and I mean really asking, not rhetorically asking, is what is enough? And am I making decisions that reflect that answer? Fourth, the tolerance of nonsense changes. I just say this directly. The older I get, the less patience I have for organizational theater, for meetings that should have been emails, for processes that exist to protect the process, for politics that have nothing to do with the actual work. When I was younger, I tolerated a lot of that, partially because I didn't know better, partially because I thought it was just the cost of doing business, partly because, frankly, I needed a paycheck and I wasn't in the position to be selective. Now I know better, and I know that life is genuinely too short, not in a bumper sticker way, in a biological reality way, to spend significant portions of it in environments that drain your energy without a return on that investment. That's not entitlement. That's wisdom. And if someone wants to argue that it's entitlement, you can make that case for whatever committee you've formed to discuss it. All right, let's get into the actual redefining because I watched a lot of people try to do this, including myself. And there are some very common and very predictable mistakes. I'm going to name five of them. Mistake number one, confusing redefining success with lowering your standards. This is a big one, and it stops a lot of people before they even start. The moment you suggest that success might look different in this chapter, someone, and it might be your own internal voice, will say, "Oh, so you're giving up." No, that's not what's happening. Lowering your standards means accepting less than you're capable of because you've lost confidence or giving up or stopped caring. Redefining success means changing the criteria for what you measure, what you're more than capable of, and what that actually looks like. Those are not the same thing. An athlete who stops competing at an elite level and starts coaching isn't lowering their standards. They're applying their expertise towards a different definition of performance. A surgeon who transitions from into teaching medical residents isn't giving up on medicine. A CFO who leaves a Fortune 500 company to advise nonprofits isn't settling. If your definition of success requires you to keep playing a game that no longer fits your life, that definition has a bug in it. Debug it. Don't just keep running the broken code. Mistake number two, making the new definition entirely about yourself. This one's sneaky because after years of building your career around institutional goals, the correction feels like it should be swinging all the way to pure self-interest. I want X, I value Y, I'm not doing Z. And yes, that self-awareness is essential. You do need to know what you want. You do need to know what you value. You do need to stop doing things that don't serve you because the institution expects it. But if your entire new definition of success is just about what you get, if it's all autonomy, all enjoyment, all personal fulfillment with no consideration for what you contribute, that's also a missing piece. The people I know who are most genuinely satisfied in their second half of their careers, and I mean the ones who look like they've actually figured something out, not just the ones who say they have, are the ones who found a way to connect what they're uniquely good at to something that matters beyond themselves. The redefinition isn't less corporate metrics, more personal joy. It's less institutional metrics, more meaningful contribution. There's a difference. Mistake number 3 is waiting for permission. I've sat across the table from some incredibly accomplished people, VP level, C suite, decades of experience, who are waiting for someone to tell them it was okay to want something different. They weren't going to quit their job without an offer in hand. They weren't going to have a direct conversation about what they needed from their organization. They weren't going to stop chasing a promotion they didn't actually want because what would people think? Here's the hard news. No one is going to give you permission to redefine your own success. Your boss is not going to pull you aside and say, you know what? I think you've been measuring yourself against the wrong things. Let's talk about what really matters to you. Your HR department's not planning a workshop called, what do you actually want from your life? Your organization has goals, and you're expected to help hit them. That's the arrangement. The redefining happens in your own head, on your own time, often in direct tension with organizational gravity that is pulling you in a different direction. You don't need permission. You need the courage not to not need permission. Mistake number 4 is thinking it's a one-time decision. I've decided what success means to me now. Great. Put it on a sticky note. Take a picture because you're going to need to make that decision again and again and again. Life is going to keep changing. Your health will change. Your relationships will change. Your financial situation will change. The market will change. Your industry will change. Your priorities will shift. Redefining success isn't a one-time grand declaration. It's an ongoing practice. It's something you revisit deliberately, not just when crisis forces you to, at regular intervals. Think of it less like writing a mission statement, more like calibrating a navigation. You're not setting the destination once and going on autopilot. You're checking your heading regularly and adjusting when you drift. The people who make this work treat it not as a habit. Treat it as a habit, not as an event. Mistake number 5, doing it alone. I know the narrative here. The lone wolf, self-made, figured out by myself story. It's appealing, and it's also mythology. The people who navigate this transition most effectively, who actually arrive at a new definition of success that holds up, have almost always done it in community with a coach, with a peer group, with a trusted colleague who are far enough outside their organization to be honest with them. The reason is simple. We cannot see our own blind spots. We are terrible judges of our own assumptions because our assumptions feel like reality. You need people around you who care enough to challenge your framework, not to tear you down, but to help you see what you can't see alone. I spent years thinking I could think my way through every transition by myself. I'm a reasonably smart person, I told myself. I'll figure it out. Let's be honest, I did not figure it out. Not as fast and not as well as if I eventually did with people in my corner who told me the truth. Don't be stubborn about this. Okay, we've talked about redefining success, what redefining success isn't. Let's talk about what it is, or more precisely, what it can be. Because I'm not going to give you someone else's definition. That would be the opposite of the point. What I will do is give you a framework, 4 dimensions, not a checklist, not a formula, a set of questions that you sit with honestly, start to sketch out the shape of what success would mean for this chapter of your career. Dimension number 1, impact over position. Here's the question. What does your presence make possible for other people? Not your title, not your org chart slot, not your authority, your presence, your expertise, your judgment, your relationships, the things you bring to a situation that would be absent if you weren't there. In the first half of your career, you're often still figuring out what that is. In the second half, you know. Maybe you're reluctant to claim it, but you know. Success redefined often pivots from what level I am at to what difference does my work make? That's not a downgrade, that's a maturation. The people who answer this question clearly and then restructure their work around maximizing that specific impact tend to be the ones who feel most energized, most relevant, and most satisfied. Not coincidentally, they also tend to be the most valuable to whoever is working with them. Dimension number 2 is autonomy over status. Here's the question. What decisions do you want to own? There's a level of seniority at which autonomy and status used to track pretty closely together. You got promoted, you got more autonomy. That made sense, and it was good. It was a good incentive structure for climbing the ladder. But at some point, and this is different for everyone, the status starts to come with less autonomy, not more. You're more visible, so more constrained. You're more senior, so more political. You have more responsibility, which sounds like freedom, but often functions like a leash. When people in the second half of their careers talk about what they want, when they really get honest about it, autonomy comes up constantly. Not fame, not a bigger office, not a seat at a bigger table, autonomy. The ability to decide how they spend their time, what problems they work on, who they work with, and when and where they do the work. If that resonates for you, it belongs in your definition. Because if your definition of success doesn't account for it, you'll keep making choices that trade it away without realizing the cost. Dimension number 3 is sustainability over intensity. Here's the question. Can I do this and want to do this for the next 10 years? I've seen a lot of people in their 50s running at a pace they set in their 30s, fueled by habits they built in their 40s, hoping the body and mind will cooperate indefinitely. They will not. I'm not suggesting you slow down. I'm suggesting you run at a pace you can sustain. There's a meaningful difference between a sprint and a marathon. Both are athletic events. One is 16 seconds, one is 2.5 hours, hopefully. They require entirely different strategies. If your current definition of success requires you to be on 24/7, to sacrifice sleep, to shortchange your relationships, to ignore your health, what happens when the system that demands that of you stops valuing what you give? You've optimized for a model that wasn't built to last, and you find out at the worst possible time. Sustainability is not laziness. Sustainability is the long game. And in the second half of your career, the long game is the only game worth playing. Dimension number 4, alignment over approval. Here's the question. I'm doing work that reflects what I actually believe or not. This one is uncomfortable, so I'll be gentle, but I'll also be honest. A lot of people, smart, experienced, capable people, spend significant portions of their careers doing work they don't believe in, for organizations whose values they whose values don't match theirs, in service of outcomes they wouldn't personally defend. And they rationalize it because the pay is good, or the brand is impressive, or they've been there a long time and it feels like a bigger risk than staying. Feels like leaving is a bigger risk than staying. And here's the thing, I'm not judging that. I've done that. Most of us have. Compromise is part of the working world. But there's a difference between occasional compromise and chronic misalignment. And in the second half of your career, chronic misalignment is one of the most expensive things you can afford. Not because it's immoral, because it's exhausting. And because the alternative, work that actually aligns with what you believe, is available to you in ways that might not have been earlier. Alignment isn't about finding the perfect job. It's about being honest about the gap between what you do and what you believe, and deciding deliberately, not by default, how much of that gap you're willing to carry. I want to slow down for a moment because I've given you a framework, and frameworks are useful, but they also become a way of staying in your head and out of your actual life. And I don't want that for you. So I want to walk you through a conversation, not with a coach, not with a career counselor, not with a trusted mentor. Though all of those are valuable, I want to walk you through the conversation you need to have with yourself. This is the conversation most people avoid, not because they don't have time, because because it's uncomfortable, because it might produce an answer they have to do something about. Here are the questions. Write them down if you can. Don't just let them go in one ear and keep driving. Question 1. If I strip away the title and the salary, what do I actually do that I believe really matters? Not what does my job description say, Not what does my LinkedIn profile claim? What do I actually do in practice that actually has genuine value? What am I doing when I feel most useful? If you can answer that clearly, you have your North Star for what to move toward. If you can't answer it, that is valuable information. It means there's work to do. Question 2. What am I still doing that I only keep doing because I've always done it? This is about inertia. We all have habits, roles, behaviors, commitments that we carry, not because they still serve us, but because they're familiar. And familiar things feel safe, which we confuse with good. What on your professional plate is there by default, not by choice? Question number 3. What would I do differently if I genuinely believed I had 10 good years left? Not 50, not forever, but 10. Now, I use 10 very deliberately because it's long enough to be ambitious and short enough to be honest. Long enough that screw it all, I'm going to sit on the beach doesn't quite work as an answer. Short enough that I'll deal with that eventually also doesn't hold up. 10 good years. What does that change? Question 4. What have I been tolerating that I've stopped even noticing? This is a sneaky one because we adapt. We are amazing, astonishing adapters. We habituate to bad commutes, bad cultures, bad bosses, bad dynamics, and eventually we stop perceiving them as problems because they become the baseline. Pay attention to what you defend that you've never chosen. Pay attention to what you explain away that your younger version would have refused. Question number 5. What would I tell someone I care about if they described my situation to me? This is an empathy trick, and it works because we're almost always kinder, clearer, and more honest when we think we're giving advice to someone else that when we think we're making decisions than when we think we're making decisions for ourselves. If your best friend, someone whose career you genuinely cared about, described your current situation to you and asked you what you thought, what would you say? Say that to yourself out loud if necessary. Write it down. The answer is usually closer to the truth than anything you've told yourself recently. So let's talk about making the shift without burning everything down. I want to talk about this practical piece because this is where things get real. You can have a beautiful definition of success. You can do the journaling. You can answer the 5 questions. You can have the conversation with yourself, and then Monday morning arrives, and you're sitting in the same meeting with the same agenda at the same organization doing the same thing, and the gap between your new definition and your current reality feels enormous. So let's talk about how you close that gap. Not all at once, not with a dramatic gesture, sustainably. Start by naming the gap. This sounds stupidly simple, and it is, and it still works. Write down what success looks like in your new terms. Write down what success looks like in your current terms, how your current situation measures it. See how they diverge. The divergence is the work. But you can't do the work if you can't see the gap. Most people are operating in a gap they've never actually mapped. Find the moves inside your current situation before you look outside. I want to be honest about something. Most people do not need to blow up their life to redefine their success. Most of the moves are internal first. Can you shift which projects you take on? Can you clarify what you want to work on more and less? Can you have a conversation with your boss or the board about how you want your role to evolve? Can you take on mentoring or coaching that gives you the contribution dimension you're missing? I'm not saying staying where you are forever. I'm saying don't assume you have to leave before you've tested what's possible where you are. Sometimes the answer really is this organization cannot accommodate what I need. That's a real answer. But sometimes the answer is I've been assuming this is impossible here, and I've never actually asked. That's a different problem. Make one decision that reflects the new definition, not 10 decisions, one. In the next 30 days, make one deliberate decision about your time, your attention, your commitments, your development that is explicitly based upon your new definition of success rather than your old one. One decision and pay attention to what happens. Notice what it costs. Notice what it returns. That's data. You're building a practice, not a proclamation. Build your outer circle deliberately. The people around you in the second half of your career matter enormously, not just professionally, personally. Who challenges your assumptions? Who tells you the truth? Who is also navigating this transition and has something useful to share? If your entire professional community is people inside your organization, you have a significant blind spot because they can only see you through the lens of the institution. You need people outside it, peer councils, professional communities, coaches, mentors who are in a different phase than you, people who have made the transition you're considering and can tell you what they wish they'd known. This isn't soft. This is strategic, deliberately. Give yourself a timeline, not a deadline. There's a difference. A deadline implies failure if you don't hit it. A timeline implies progress. The shift from an old definition of success to the new one is not going to happen in a week. It might take a year. For some people, it takes longer. And that's fine as long as you are moving. The worst version of this is staying stuck in the gap indefinitely, knowing the old definition doesn't fit, but not committing to the new one either. That gap space is genuinely miserable. And the only way through it is to make decisions, imperfect ones, and adjust. You're not going to get it perfect. Just get it started. I want to take a minute here and talk about what the other side looks like, not in a motivational poster way, in a practical, this is what I've observed way. Because I think people sometimes resist the redefining process because they can't picture what they're actually aiming for. And when you can't picture the destination, the journey seems pointless. So here's what I've seen in the people, including people in my own life, who have generally done this work. They stop performing their career. That might sound like a small thing. It's not. So much of what people in the second half of their career are doing is performing, managing how they're perceived, playing the role of the executive or the leader or the expert, projecting the version of themselves that the institution needs to see. And it takes enormous amount of energy. When people find their way to a definition of success that actually fits, a lot of what a lot of that performance stops. Not because they stop caring, because they stop needing the performance, because the work they're doing is close enough to who they actually are that the gap doesn't need to be bridged. They make decisions faster, not because they stop thinking, because they know what they're optimizing for. Clarity is a decision making accelerator. When you know your criteria, the decision is almost automatic. When you don't know your criteria, every decision is a negotiation with yourself that you can never fully win. They stop competing with the wrong people. This one is subtle, not profound. In the first half of a career, comparison is everywhere. You're comparing yourself with your peers, to people a level above you, to whoever got the promotion you wanted. And most of that comparison is corrosive, but it has a certain utility. It tells you where you stand on the ladder. When you redefine success, you often stop caring about the ladder. Not because you stop being ambitious, because your ambition redirects towards something that's genuinely yours. And once it's genuinely yours, other people's positions on a different ladder are simply irrelevant. They get selective in the way they look, in a way that looks like confidence. The people who have found their version of success in the second half of their careers are not saying yes to everything. They are saying no often and clearly to things that don't fit. And that selectivity, which earlier in your career might look like arrogance or inflexibility, now reads as clarity, as earned judgment, as someone who knows exactly what they're doing and why. That's what you're building here. Not a title, not a number, a life, when you look at it clearly, makes sense to you. I want to close with a question I got from a conversation I had recently with someone, a very experienced, very accomplished professional who was in the middle of exactly this transition. We've been talking for a while, going through all the things we've talked about in this episode, the old definition, the new framework, the practical steps. And at some point, he stopped and said something that I haven't been able to shake since. He said, I think my whole career, I've been answering the question, am I successful? But I've never actually asked the question, successful at what? And I sat with that for a minute because it landed pretty hard. Success at what? Not successful, full stop, yes or no, as if success is a binary state that the universe either grants or withholds. Successful at a specific something, a thing you chose, a definition you built, criteria that actually reflect who you are and what you value. Successful at what? That's the question. I can't answer it for you. What I can tell you is this, that if you don't answer it deliberately, the world around you will answer it by default. Your organization will decide for you. Your industry will decide for you. Your most recent job description will decide for you. And those defaults might or might not have anything to do with what actually matters to you. The second half of your career is not a consolation prize. It is not the part where you coast until you can retire. It's not where you manage decline or accept irrelevance or pretend to be satisfied. It is the part where you finally have enough experience, enough data, enough hard earned, hard won wisdom, enough scars, and enough successes to build something that is genuinely yours. That's the opportunity. And it doesn't come with an expiration date, but it does come with a clock, and the clock is ticking. So, what are you waiting for? I'm Rich Jones. This is Live Without an Expiration Date. If this episode hits something real for you, share it with someone who's in the same place. Leave a review if you're so moved. The algorithm apparently notices these things, and I've made peace with that, and I now care about the algorithm. Sometimes my younger self, somewhere my younger self is shaking his head. Talk to you soon.